Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be dissertating and talking about Western astrology versus Vedic astrology. Well, let's start out with a little history regarding this so we can understand, I guess, the disparity or difference between the two. Happened was in the 3rd century, there was something called a precession of equinoxes began, and when this transpired, you saw a change. I guess you could say the Earth's equator, somewhat goes into reverse, and that's caused a different outlook, I guess you could say, between Western and Vedic astrology on the positions of planets, house placements. Because of this reversal, you see there is a discrepancy of about 22 maybe to 24 degrees in planetary positions from the Vedic perspective or perception and the Western perception. The thing is, around that time in the 3rd century, both the Vedic and Western Aries were on the same precise plane. But because of that shift in time, in the position due to the precession of equinoxes, and I guess you could say the equator going into, reverse through the constellations in this period, it's caused that 23-degree, approximate maybe, around there, that difference, and consequently, you have the Western astrology using placements that are 22 to 24 maybe degrees further in placement on average, because the Western astrology is using the theoretical positions based from that time, and what's happened is Vedic astrology is using the more, I guess you could say, the scientific or the precise placements where these planets are now, which on the surface would indicate that Vedic on the surface would seem to be the more accurate one. However, though these positions are for Western are based on the positions based on that time period in the third century, I find them to be more accurate, and I'm going to first explain. I'm going to use something with myself, my own chart, to kind of demonstrate this. One thing is, as far as my rising sign, my moon sign, and ascendant, I think are more typical of the Western chart. My rising sign is Taurus. In Western astrology, Vedic astrology, my rising sign is Aries. I think it's safe to say that my personality and appearance is a lot more Taurus than it would be Aries. Aries inclines toward a lean, spare, kind of thin body, and Taurus is more, stocky, robust kind of build, full face, full features, while the Aries is more of, a thinner, triangular shaped head and more, red in the skin, can incline toward, reddish, curly hair possibly. And I would say the Taurus, the build, and everything, personality, appearance is more Taurus than Aries. Now, if we look at the moon sign, the moon is connected with our emotional needs, and in Western astrology that's Gemini for me. Now, in Vedic astrology, my moon position would be Taurus. Now, the Gemini, seems to be more me, because my emotional needs often, require, assimilating information day to day, communicating, learning, reading a magazine or a newspaper, things of that nature. And while the Taurus is more about, just, comfort, situations, having a pet around, things, emotion, more, Taurian as far as emotional, I guess you could say, the emotional needs would go. Now, we'll go to my sun sign, which is Cancer. Would be Gemini, in the Vedic. Sun sign being Cancer seems to hold more true to me. Being, introverted, the homebody, emotional. I think those qualities resonate more with me than the Sun in Gemini, where those are your, I guess you could say, your just your basic wants, in life, and even though my moon is in Gemini, which would indicate some Gemini characteristics, the Sun in Gemini, as far as my basic character, I don't really see that, having, exhibiting or exuding those characteristics. And Sun in Gemini can often be non-conforming, obviously, mercurial, changeable, and I don't really see myself, really fitting that bill. So anyway, now there's other things that they talk about, with the, there's a number of people that in Vedic astrology that will say that it's more accurate and valid in terms of, futuristic events and predicting things, for somebody as far as transits may go and progressions. Well, what I can say is I believe Western could very well be accurate in terms of those, in terms of progressions or transits or what have you. I can use myself as an example. Well, first thing is, on July 25th, 1993, my grandfather died. At this point in time, Pluto, transiting Pluto, was like about a half a degree away from my 7th house cusp of relationships. So, I mean, that seems to be too coincidental and too precise for me to just blow it off on coincidence. Pluto transits a 7th house. It could often be an end of a relationship that, relationship that is eradicated or has come to an end. And sure enough, that's what happened. In my grandfather's solar chart, I don't know his time of birth, Pluto was very close to was very tight square between his natal sun sign, and would have more likely than not in his solar chart would have been in his 4th house, and the 4th house does rule the end of life. Anyway, another thing that was connected, I guess you could say connected with me, which I could say to help validate, as far as predictions, predicting things with the use of Western astrology. Around July 6th, 2006, I became homeless. It lasted for about a 4-year period. At this time of this inception, or lack of a better word, there were a multitude of planets, progressed, and, current transiting planets in my 4th house at that time. The Sun was also in Cancer, which rules the home. At this point in time, I had my progressed Mercury was in the 4th house at this time. At this time, transiting Mercury and Mars and Saturn had traversed my 4th house as well. I mean, there was all kinds of 4th house activity, so it doesn't really come as a shocker to me that there was going to be some kind of transition and some kind of strong activity pertaining to, moving and, home and family. And of course, Mercury was retrograde at this point in time, so that was just great for me to have communications, go on a downslide in this period too. There's some things that I could talk about as far as, things that happen general in society, in the world too, which had to do with, planetary activity based on Western astrology. In 1995, Pluto entered Sagittarius in January of 95. And this around right near this point in time in this this season or near this season in Major League Baseball in the United States, there was such a strong proliferation of home run power numbers. I mean, you saw people hitting astronomical totals starting near this period. In 1998, I mean, when Pluto was still in Sagittarius, I mean, forget it. You had that classic Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa battle, which one wound up with like 71 home runs, and that was McGwire. Sosa, I think, 66. You saw these astronomical, prodigious power numbers, and we were, as a society, in awe of this. We were awestruck. Pluto is often associated with power, and I mean, control, manipulation. I mean, at this point in time, we know now that a number of these players were taking performance-enhancing substances in order to have these prodigious power totals. It showed that athletes were in control and power in this period. However, what happened was, in 2008, Pluto entered Capricorn, and Capricorn is often associated with authority and control, discipline. When this time, at this particular point in time, power numbers were diminishing and declining immensely. Home run totals in particular in Major League Baseball. We saw greater stringent drug testing policies. Players and owners would acquiesce to to certain deals that were connected with this. So I mean, the timetable, I don't think doesn't lie. People in Vedic astrology that are supporters of Vedic can say, well, I mean, it's so much more accurate as as far as predicting events and being talking about futuristic things, as opposed to Western. But I think Western can make a strong argument that they can predict certain things through transits and progressions. I just wanted to say that I'm not going to say that this is anything where I'm being completely adversarial as far as my stance against Vedic astrology, although I I go with Western astrology when I do my chart calculations using the Placidus house system. I'm not here to necessarily debunk or denounce Vedic astrology, but I feel that I favor the Western because it does seem to be more accurate in terms of the chart, as far as the natal charts for individuals, rising sign placement, house placements, planetary placements. Though it may be, the positions may be considered theoretical and based on the time, the positions of the stars, the planets over, back in the third century. I do, feel that, we resonate more with Western astrology as opposed to Vedic. There's people in, that have their own preference to Vedic, and what it is they're more than happy to stay with Vedic. Now, if you look at some interpretations for certain things, like if Vedic talks about the moon in Gemini, or Sun in Cancer, or Mercury in Scorpio, and things like that, some of their delineations may be, could be very well accurate. But the main difference, a disagreement I have is the positions they use for their planets, their house positions, and the way they calculate the chart, which puts the chart, roughly 22, 23, 24 degrees behind the Western astrology chart. So that's basically what I wanted to state regarding Western versus Vedic astrology. And people, guess another thing I wanted to point out, this is didn't really touch up on this, but in Western astrology, because of a 22 to 24 degree discrepancy in house placements, the rising sign will generally be different about 73% of the time. You might have in some cases the Vedic rising sign and the ascendant sign could be the same in Vedic and Western, but in different degrees. If, like, say, if you had 2 degree, someone could have 2 degrees Taurus rising in Vedic and might have, something like, 26 degrees Taurus rising in Western. Well, people, that will conclude this YouTube astrological segment for Western astrology versus Vedic astrology. And stay tuned next time, where I'll be continuing my, I guess you could say, my house ruler segments. 2 things I want to get with you on before I head out. Firstly, the stars may impel, but do not compel. And secondly, never isolate any single astrological element, aspect, planetary placement, position, configuration, influence, or what have you, and make an analysis on a person, astrologically speaking, based on this alone. Because a person, astrologically, is the sum of all their components in their natal chart, and not just one. Until next time, people, stay well.